Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Sparshot and Andover's UCAS presentation for parents. Hopefully you can hear us. This will be recorded and we will be putting it on the college website along with both PowerPoint presentations. So if you miss anything, please do take the opportunity to review those presentations and do forward any queries you have to us at thecareers@sparshot.com. So during the presentation tonight, I'll be answering any questions that you have. So please put them into the chat and I'll answer as we go along. And the presentation evening is in two parts. First, Josh will talk to us about the UCAS process and how you can help your young person through the process of applying to university for September 2026. He'll then be followed by Claudia, who's joining us from Portsmouth University, who'll talk to us about student finance. And please, once again, if you have any queries, please put them in the chat and we'll get answers back to you as soon as we can. So I'm going to hand over to Josh, who's one of our careers advisors at Sparshot and Andover College, who'll be able to talk us through the process. And then, as I said, we'll then move on to Portsmouth University. Over to you, Josh. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So as Laura suggested, the kind of first half of today's presentation will be covering the UCAS process for this year. So you can kind of go away and support your young people with that process. So in terms of what we are going to cover, initially we're going to look at some key dates and deadlines. So you know exactly when you need to get your young person to submit their application by. We'll then talk about the application itself, what the students are required to do and the kind of different steps they need to take. Part of that is completing a personal statement. I will kind of generally discuss what students have to do, as well as kind of linking you to the support that we can provide with the personal statement. I'll then talk you through kind of additional resources. And then kind of thinking a little bit further into the future, we'll talk about kind of decisions, so how universities make their decisions about applications and how students can kind of track their application all the way up until the time that they actually take the step to university. So broadly speaking, that's what I'm going to cover this evening. As Laura suggested, please put any questions that you have in the chat and we will kind of circle around to answer those as soon as we can. So to begin with, as I suggested, we're going to talk about some of the key deadlines going forward for young people and kind of when they need to meet those deadlines. So the kind of key deadline for students is the 14th of November. That is an internal deadline that we set, which is kind of enables us to kind of manage the application load that we have at Sparshot and Andover. Essentially, there's lots of things that we need to do with a student's application before we can actually send it off. We actually have to send it off by the 14th of January, which is the equal consideration date that you can see kind of on the screen in front of you. As I said, there's lots of things that we need to do with a student's application. We need to add a reference. We need to add their predicted grades. And having that kind of early internal deadline also enables us to kind of work with students on their application and make sure everything is as good as it can be before we then send it to the universities. That 14th of January deadline is particularly important because it's what's referred to as the UCAS equal consideration date. That means that if you meet that deadline and submit before, universities have to look at the application. So they actually have to look at the application that's been submitted. If for whatever reason you cannot submit before that date and you miss that deadline, if universities already have a kind of established cohort of students that they're looking at their applications, they may not circle around to look at yours. So to give your students and kind of your young people the best possible chance, we need to receive your application by the 14th of November, and then therefore we guarantee that it's going to be sent off by the 14th of January. Hopefully that is clear. If you have any questions, as I said, please pop it in the chat. In terms of some key facts about the application, firstly, students will get 5 university course choice options as part of their application, and that could be similar courses at 5 different universities, or if you have a university that you're particularly keen on, you could pick multiple courses at that one institution. It is free for students to kind of decide exactly how they would like to compile those 5 options. But the advice that we would always give to students is to have choice if they can possibly kind of make that situation arise. So What we don't want to happen is you kind of put all of your eggs in one basket and then potentially, pick a couple of universities that turn out not to be a good fit. So giving yourself choice will kind of prevent that from happening. When your student or young person submits their kind of 5 choices on the UCAS application, they don't do it in any kind of preference order. They're just going to submit 5 choices and they are all treated equally. Crucially, the universities cannot see where else you have applied when you submit the application. So all that they will see is that you have applied to them. I've already mentioned the importance of the equal consideration date, but just to restate, if we can get your applications in by the 14th of November, that then means that we'll send it off by that equal consideration date, and you'll give yourself the best possible chance of kind of achieving your courses that you've kind of put on that application. I would say that the thing that is often undersold when kind of students are looking at the application is the research that they do. Research is a fundamentally important part of the application process. And I suppose you're kind of looking at 2 key things with that research. On one hand, you are looking at the university course. So you are looking at what is that kind of course, how long is it? What are the modules that they can study? What am I going to be doing for that 3 to 4 year period? On the other side, I would say the other thing is the kind of physical university environment. Do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be in the countryside? These are all kind of questions that students need to ask themselves to ensure that they're making informed decisions. In a situation where a student absolutely loves their course, but doesn't particularly enjoy the environment they're in, they're not going to have a kind of successful and happy time at university, and vice versa. So I would really suggest looking in detail at all of the course options, and you can do that on the UCAS website. On the other hand, I would say going to open days is a really crucial thing to do, purely because it will give you the chance to set foot in that university environment and kind of see what it's going to be like. Open days are kind of ongoing at the moment, so really make that a priority to go and visit if you haven't already. Lastly, applying costs £28.95, so you do have to pay for the application. And if you are paying for that application, it makes sense to put 5 choices down simply because you want to kind of make the most of the application. The only reason that you would have the application fee waived for whatever reason is because you have your young person has had free school meals at any point in the last 6 years. If that is the case, all that they need to do is tick that box on the application, and then you will kind of have that application fee waived and they won't be required to pay on submission. So really, really important. If you've had free school meals at any point in the last 6 years, your young person shouldn't have to pay for the application. Okay. So this is the kind of student journey when they kind of go through that application process. Initially, they will register for an account and begin to kind of carry out their research. We have done this with the majority of students and tried to see as many students as we can and getting them signed up correctly. There is one key thing that I will mention on the next slide, which is critical that students have to do when they begin that process, and it's inputting the buzzword. That buzzword links you to us at the college, and it means that we can kind of see the progress of the application on our kind of advisor window and can therefore help the student with that process. But the student will kind of begin that process of research and complete all of the sections of the application. When they have done that, they will then submit it through the UCAS hub and it will send it to us at the college. Myself and the other members of the careers team will then review the application. We will then add a reference for that student and their predicted grades. It is also at this stage that we can potentially send the application back to the student if needed to make amendments. What I would say is when the student has submitted the application for the first time, please tell them to keep an eye on their Teams messages and keep an eye on their kind of email address that they use to sign up for UCAS. That is how, as a careers team, we will look to kind of correspond with the student to firstly let them know that they need to make changes and let them know kind of what changes they need to make. Where sometimes in the past we fall into a bit of a gap is we will send the application back to the student and they will then either not pick up our message or will make the changes, but then not resubmit their application. There is nothing that we can do as advisors to pull that application through. We have to wait for the student to submit. Particularly if we're kind of getting close to the deadline on the 14th of January, that can be a real issue in terms of getting it sent off in time. So what I would say is ask your young person to take ownership of their application and just ask them to keep an eye on those kind of Teams messages in their email, and that's where we can correspond with them. If everything is as it should be, and we've kind of had a look through and reviewed it, and there's nothing that we think that needs to be changed, we will then send it to UCAS and the universities on behalf of the student, and then the universities will make their decisions on the application from there. As I said, the kind of key thing that students need to do when they are actually starting an application is to put in the buzzword. Now, there are two different buzzwords, one for each campus, so relatively self-explanatory. If you're a young person who's a student at Andover, that buzzword is Andover 26. And if they're a student at Sparsholt, it is Sparsholt 26. What that does is it links you to us at the college, so we can see your progress with the application, but critically, we will provide you with your reference and your predicted grades. Sometimes students sign up and they don't follow this process of linking to us, and it means that they know that they're meant to get a reference, but they're not sure where it's coming from or how they get it. And fundamentally, the reason we haven't provided it yet is we don't know that they're applying. If it is kind of submitted and they use that buzzword, it will just make the progress of their kind of application so much smoother, and it will mean that we can provide the kind of full level of support. But really, really critical. If you have kind of started an application with your young person at home and you're not sure how to do that, please get in contact with the careers team and we can kind of talk you through that process. Moving on to the application itself. So the application has three general sections: the profile, the experiences section, and then the personal statement. I would say that the kind of thing that is going to take you the most time actually is kind of looking into your choices and kind of selecting those 5 course options and the personal statement. Everything else can be done relatively quickly, but we just need to make sure that young people are putting in the correct information. As you can see in front of you, the first section is the kind of application profile, where the students will fill out their personal details. Relatively self-explanatory. What I would say is particularly key with the profile section and the kind of golden rule is if your young person has had a specific experience and the application asks them to tick a box to declare that they've had that experience, please request that they do that. Often it is a kind of fast track for receiving support from universities. And if you let them know now, they'll be aware of that kind of student's need on arrival. If you don't tick that box now and you do require support for anything, it can take time to get what the student needs if they arrive at university and then declare it. So golden rule, if you require support for anything, so that could be a mental health condition, a learning difference, whatever it might be, please declare that information here and then the universities can support you straight away. Fundamentally, no decisions on the kind of applicant as a candidate will be made about any of the information that is put in the profile section. It is purely there to support the student when they arrive. Okay. The next section is the experiences section. And I would say the kind of 2 key things that you need to focus on here are the education and the employment history. So for education, what the young person is required to do is put in everything that they have studied from GCSE onwards and where they studied those qualifications. So they will put in their secondary school and all of their GCSE results under that heading, but they will also be required to put in the qualifications that they are currently studying either at Andover or Sparsholt. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit more difficult. There are a whole range of different qualifications that students can study with us. What I would say is, if it is an A-level qualification at Andover, you just need to put the A-level qualification in and the overall grade as pending, because fundamentally you don't have the grade yet because it's a 2-year course. On the other side of that, there will be kind of BTEC qualifications. If your young person is studying a 2-year BTEC qualification, that will mean that they have modules from last year's study that they will have grades for, and modules from this year's study that they haven't yet completed and don't have the grades for. What you're required to do is put all of the grades that you have from last year in, and all the modules that you're studying this year, but you will leave the grades blank because you fundamentally don't have them. In the same way, you don't have the overall qualification grade yet as well, so you will put that in as pending. It is really critically important that you do that, purely because it means that we can actually provide a predicted grade for the student. If you put the grades in, or the student puts in the grades that they think that they're going to achieve, it causes us some issues, and we'll have to send the application back to the student in that kind of middle section that I showed you earlier. What I would say is, if you are in doubt about any of the qualifications, how you put them in, what exactly is the qualification they are studying, please get in touch with us. If we can kind of troubleshoot those issues now, it will save us a lot of time kind of further down the line. So moving on to kind of the employment section. The employment section is a history of paid employment only. There's not a huge amount of detail that you need to put in. All that you need to put in is basically kind of what the job title was, what organization they worked for, and the kind of time period that they worked there. The extra activities section is also an opportunity for students to share any kind of additional activities that have kind of prepared them for higher education. What I would suggest that you do is go and have a look at the kind of list of options that they provide there, and it will be clear quite quickly the kind of thing that they are looking for. If there are anything that your young person has done that kind of fall under the category on that list, put it in. It's a really good information to include. I appreciate that some of the information about the education in particular can be a little bit complex, but just to kind of recap about the education section, if they are currently completing the qualification and they don't have the grade for it yet, they put the grade in as pending. If they have completed modules in previous years of studying that qualification and they do have the grades for them, they put the modules that they have done and put the grades in. The modules that they haven't done yet, they'll still put the modules in, but they'll leave the grades as blank. I appreciate it's a very wordy way of looking at it, but if you have any questions, please let us know. We then have the personal statement section. So the personal statement section, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is also a section which can take up quite a lot of time from the student's perspective. And that's because it asks students to do something that's fundamentally quite difficult, which is to write about themselves. But more than that, it has to go through a process of refinement and improvement. So as a careers team, we will read through the kind of any student's personal statement as many times as they would like us to, in order to kind of help improve kind of what we are presenting to those universities. To kind of recap on kind of what the personal statement is and kind of how it functions, it is the opportunity for the student to show their passion and their curiosity and their interest for their chosen subject area. And new for this year, UCAS have decided that rather than having one submission box for your personal statement, that they've included 3 questions and that students are required to answer those 3 questions to complete their personal statement. I'll touch base on kind of what those questions are in a minute, but I'll kind of tell you about kind of how much you have to write first. So in terms of kind of character limits, 4,000 characters is that kind of upper limit. And you have to include a minimum of 350 characters per section. Typically, when I deliver this material to students in sessions, their first kind of query is, oh, 4,000 characters, that sounds like it's loads. It's actually not that much at all. You're looking at about 750 words, so a side and a half of A4 in size 12 font. So it is not a huge amount of writing at all, but what that does mean is that we need to work with students because they need to be very selective about the information that they include. Crucially, the student will write one personal statement. That one personal statement has to apply to all 5 of the course choice options that that student makes. For lots of students, that's relatively simple because they are, say, thinking of applying to 5 zoology courses or 5 psychology courses at university. Where that becomes a little bit more difficult is if the student is selecting multiple different course options because perhaps they haven't made up their mind yet. If that is the case, I would say that students just need to be careful that they are not kind of pigeonholing themselves to just discuss one subject area when they're applying to multiple. We can help the students to kind of structure the statement in that case, and I would really urge you to reach out to us to help them do that. There isn't a spelling or grammar check on the UCAS hub where you actually submit the personal statement. So our advice would be do it in Word and then copy and paste it across when you're finished. So you kind of have the full facility of spell check, grammar check, etc. There is also no formatting. So there is no headings, no subheadings, no underlining, no bold. Just the text goes into those boxes that you can see on the screen. What I would say, however, is that although you kind of have the full, there's no kind of formatting, spelling, punctuation, and grammar is really important. Purely for the reason that if we submit an application and not, we would catch it if this was the case and make sure that the student improved it. But if the student isn't taking the time to kind of check through and make sure it's as good as it can be, that will raise questions from the university if they can see it kind of littered with mistakes. So it is an important document, and they'll learn a really important skill as young people by going through and editing their own work. Lastly, and this is a really critical point, particularly with the development of AI and kind of different technology in recent years, every single personal statement that is submitted through UCAS is run through similarity detection software. So that means that if the student has plagiarized, i.e. used somebody else's work and included it in their statement and tried to pass it off as their own, that will flag it up on the system and their application will be rejected. Similarly, if the student uses AI to write their personal statement, it will have the same conclusion. My advice would be, fundamentally, it's a personal statement. If you are using something else or someone else's work to write it, not only will your application all be rejected anyway, which is a good enough reason, but it's also missing the point of what we're trying to get the young person to do. It's a personal statement. And actually, these skills, which the student will kind of develop through this process, will be, stand them in good stead for later life as well. And that's kind of one of the key things we really stress with students. It can seem quite difficult when they're going through their process and perhaps writing about themselves for the first time, but it is a really critical skill that they will need to use as they kind of progress through into not only university, but employment as well. So these are the 3 questions that students are required to answer to complete the personal statement. They are, why do you want to study this course or subject? How have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? And what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? If I had to kind of sum up exactly kind of what information that you're including to answer these 3 questions, broadly speaking, for question 1, you are looking at why does the student want to study that course or subject, and where did that kind of passion originate from? The second question is, broadly speaking, what has the student done in education that has helped prepare them for that course or subject? And lastly, what else have they done outside of education? So if you're wondering where to include those experiences, just think in education for question 2, outside of education for question 3. I have been into quite a large number of groups to discuss personal statements over the last couple of weeks, and will continue to do so right up until the deadline or internal deadline on the 14th of November. There is a huge amount of different resources that students will have access to help them with that process. But please, if your young person is struggling for whatever reason, or they have a first draft, get them to come and see us. Ultimately, the personal statement is like a jigsaw, and crucially, each part of that jigsaw is made up of reflective evidence. I use this slide just to make the kind of key point that sometimes students just list their experiences when they do the personal statement. They will say, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this. What we really want to see through the personal statement is not only stating what your young person has done throughout it in education and outside of education, but also state what they learned from that experience, and getting themselves to kind of reflect upon those experiences and crucially see how it's prepared them for higher education. That is the key part. How have your experiences as a young person kind of formed you and kind of prepared you for that step to university? That is the information that they really want to see. In terms of some of those additional resources, I would say that the kind of first point of call should be the UCAS website itself. On the UCAS website, there is a personal statement guide for absolutely every different subject area. So if your young person is applying to a psychology course, there will be a psychology personal statement which will give more detailed information about what they should include. This information that you can find on UCAS is like gold dust, because it is information directly taken from admissions teams at universities. So the people reading through those statements, what they like to see. So if you can, get your young person to have a look at that information, purely because it will make sure that they've got that kind of gold dust that they can sprinkle into their personal statement to make it as good as it can be. Now, That is the application process as a whole and what the student needs to do to kind of complete that application process. What I'm going to kind of cast forward now is to kind of how universities make their decisions, and then how universities make their offer and the kind of different responses that students can receive. So absolutely every student who submits a UCAS application will be judged on the three kind of green criteria that you can see on the left-hand side. They will look at their qualifications and their grades. They will have a look at their personal statement, and they will have a look at the reference that will be provided by their lecturers. Sometimes, depending on the subject area that you're applying for, the student will also be required to potentially submit an admissions test. That tends to be for kind of very, very highly competitive course areas. An interview, I would say, is more common, and it's kind of driven by your subject area. For example, if anybody is applying for kind of nursing-based courses, I would say it's pretty typical to have an interview. Anybody who is applying for a teaching course, also you're likely to have an interview as well. What I would say is, if they are going for an interview, they will make the student aware of that by corresponding with them directly through the UCAS hub and to their own personal email address that they've used for the UCAS application. Sometimes students fall into a little bit of a gap where they've submitted their application and they kind of wipe their hands with it and think, I'm done. There's nothing else I need to do. What they need to be doing is kind of keep checking their UCAS hub to see if there's any additional things that they need to do. And the interview could be one of those. If they are required to go for an interview, we as a careers team can provide a kind of mock interview for them. So we can kind of exactly replicate the environment that they will go into to ensure that they are fully prepared. If that's something that they are keen on, once again, please get in touch with us. Lastly, some students may have to go for a portfolio submission or an audition process. Portfolio tends to be kind of creative art or kind of architecture courses, things like that, where they need to kind of see a kind of skill level in that area. We have somebody coming in to speak about portfolios at Andover in November to kind of sit down with students, discuss what they look for in those portfolios, and also to give them a bit of a review of the information that they've already kind of completed. If there is anybody else who is looking at a portfolio that isn't at Andover, potentially at Sparsholt, please get in touch with us and I can kind of forward that information on to them. Auditions, lastly, tend to be for those kind of performing arts or kind of dance-based subjects. Within sessions, they will be preparing your young people for those auditions and those processes. But if they're unsure about how that process is going to work, please send them our way. Lastly, I would say that the UCAS kind of hub and the UCAS website is where your student can kind of track their application from start to finish. So it is where they will apply, it's where they'll submit their application, and it's where they'll receive their offers back from universities as well. Crucially, there are 3 different types of decisions that students can receive, and they are listed at the kind of bottom left of your screen. They can receive an unconditional offer, a conditional offer, or it can say that they've been unsuccessful. Unsuccessful, relatively self-explanatory. They're not going to offer the student a place. But crucially, there is kind of a subtle distinction between an unconditional offer and a conditional offer. So an unconditional offer is basically saying if your young person accepts that offer, they have their place at university confirmed and there is nothing else that they need to do. It's quite rare that that happens, but it's just being fully aware of what that means. And if your student selects that option and kind of clicks, yeah, I want to accept that offer, they have their place confirmed and that is where they're going. On the other hand, a conditional offer, I would say, is far more common. And basically what a conditional offer does is it says, yeah, we would love to accept your student onto this course, but they need to achieve X, Y, or Z. That might be some of those things that I referred to on the previous page. So an admissions test, attending an interview, or the submission of a portfolio or an audition. But crucially, there is something that they need to achieve. I'd say most commonly that is grades in their final year. So they will open up their results on results day, they'll have a look at their UCAS hub and go, perfect, I've got what I need, I'm going to university. With conditional offers, the student is able to put in a first choice and then a second choice as a backup option. But obviously with an unconditional offer where you get that kind of one option, you won't get the opportunity to do. So if your student gets conditional offers, they're going to put their first choice in, ideally kind of the best place that they want to go to, and then a backup option that they still would feel happy going to if they didn't quite meet the terms of their offer. It's just a little bit of a safety net to help students and kind of help them navigate that situation. Now, in terms of support, I've mentioned it several times. I don't doubt that I will have been in touch with a lot of your young people already to help them with this process, but either they can contact me on Teams. So my name is Joshua Stanbrook Tompkins, or alternatively, they can email the careers@sparshop.ac.uk email address, and we will look to support you from there. Hopefully that has given you a bit of an understanding of kind of how this process works. I will now jump kind of into the kind of questions chat and be able to answer any of your questions there. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just hand over to Claudia from the University of Portsmouth, who will then begin the discussion of student finance.
Thanks, Josh. That's great. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen now with you. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen and also hear me nice and clearly. So my name's Claudia. I work for the student money team at the University of Portsmouth. So although I work for a university, the information I am about to give you will be relevant for whichever university your young person goes to. So this is a general introduction to student finance and how money works for students while they're at uni. When I'm not doing talks like this, I'm supporting our own students with my team here if they are experiencing any issues with their student loan or if they're experiencing financial difficulties. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a summary of me. Okay. So I won't go into this slide in great detail, but really it's just a bit of a reassurance around student loans. To say that your young person won't need to have lots, like all of the cost of university up front. There is money towards the help, towards helping with living costs. There's extra financial support for those who might need it most. Repayments are different to any other kind of loan and work much more like a kind of graduate tax. And hopefully all of that will become kind of obvious as we go through. So just a kind of visual representation. It's not kind of necessarily mathematically accurate, but this pie chart shows you different areas where students might get money from. So the first quarter of the pie, actually, I'll talk about the different colours. The two main costs that all students will have are their tuition fees and their living costs. So the first quarter of the pie, sort of between 12 and 3 on a clock, is the student loan, and it comes in two parts to help with both those costs. The bottom part of the pie, the bottom half of the pie, are some other sources of income or money that some students might be able to access. And the final quarter of the pie is the financial contribution that students or their families might need to contribute directly towards their time at uni. First of all, I will very quickly say a quick word about student loan eligibility. So there are a few things that can affect whether a student can get a student loan. Age is to do with the sort of maximum upper limits once students reach the age of 60, but the most common question I get for school, college or sixth form students is around nationality and residency. So in general, students need to be a UK national or have settled status and have lived in the UK for the last 3 years. So it's not one or the other, it's both. So even if the student's a UK national, if they were living abroad until recently, it might affect their student loan eligibility. So it's definitely worth checking if that is relevant to you. Okay, so on to their first main cost. So the maximum fees at publicly funded universities in this current academic year is £9,535 a year for full-time courses. Some courses might be lower than that, but that's the maximum that the vast majority of universities can charge. There are a handful of private universities in the UK and they can charge higher fees, but the vast majority, regardless of the university or the course that the student is doing, fees for the first year of their degree will be £9,535. It's possible that this might be increased slightly next year. Tuition fees didn't change for many years, and then this academic year, the government allowed universities to increase fees by a couple of £100. It's possible that they might allow that to happen again along the line, sort of following inflation for next academic year, but it's unlikely that fees are going to increase significantly, and it's also unlikely they're going to decrease as well. So most students will find that they will pay something around the figure you can see on this slide for each year of their course. The good news is that a student doesn't have to have, all of that saved in the bank, so nearly £10,000 per year of their course, because if they're eligible for a student loan, they can get a tuition fee loan, which will pay 100% of those fees at publicly funded universities. They're not means tested in any way, so it doesn't matter what parents earn or how high household income is. And also that money is paid directly to the university, so it doesn't even go in or out of the student's bank account, which means it's very straightforward, and that's how most students will choose to pay their tuition fees. So that's their fees covered, essentially. The part where it gets more complicated is around living costs. So not only might all students have varying living costs, the part of the student loan which they can receive, which is a contribution to help towards those living costs, is called the maintenance loan, and each student can receive different, like everybody can get different amounts. So what determines how much a student can get for their maintenance loan will depend on their household income and where they live and study. This money is paid directly to the student into their bank account in 3 instalments across the year, so they receive a third each term. If the student is receiving towards the lower amount, closer to the minimum maintenance loan, and especially if they are living away from home, it is unlikely to cover all of their costs, which means that they may need to find some extra money or have some extra money available to contribute in addition to the maintenance loan in order to pay for everything they want to do whilst they're at uni. And also, it is possible that the maintenance loan a student receives might change from year to year. It will only change significantly if there's been a big change in household income or potentially where the student is living and studying. So what is household income? For most students aged under 25, household income is essentially their parents' income. For students going to university next year, September 2026, it will be the total taxable gross income of their parents for the tax year which ended this April just gone. So the 24 to 25 tax year. So if the student has both parents at home, it's the household income is the income of both parents added together. If parents are separated or divorced and live in separate households, household income is the income of the parent that the student normally lives with. So if I'm a student and my mum and dad are separated and I mostly live with mum, if mum is single, it's just mum's income that makes up my household income. If mum gets a new partner who moves in with us, then the new partner's income is also included in household income. So this slide is a really, really crucial slide. If you're going to take a photograph, it's the one I would take a photograph of, although these slides will be available to you afterwards. So this table gives you an idea of how much students can receive for maintenance loans in this current academic year. And just like tuition fees, there's unlikely to be a significant change next year. They might increase slightly with inflation, but this table still will give you a very good kind of approximate idea of how much maintenance loan your young person might be entitled to receive. So as well as household income, where the student lives whilst they study will affect the loan, and there are 3 rates. So the far column on the right hand side is the rate for students going to a university in London and living away from home. So that's the highest rate to reflect the high cost of living in London. The middle column is the at-home rate. So this is the rate given to students who choose to stay living in the parental home whilst they are at uni and maybe commuting to a local university that they can travel to from home. And we have seen an increase nationally in the number of students choosing to do this. But still, the majority of students, the most popular option is to live away from the parental home whilst at university. And the living away rate is for all students living away from home at any university outside of London. So I'm going to focus on that to kind of explain the table to you. But obviously you would look at the correct kind of column for your young person, depending on whether they're living away from home at a London uni, staying at home and going to a local uni, or living away from home, going to any other university outside London. So if we look at the far left column, it's household income, and Student Finance England, which is where the loan comes from, kind of take two thresholds. Their minimum income threshold is £25,000. So if your total taxable gross income or your household income is less than £25,000, the student is entitled to the maximum maintenance loan, which for this year, living away from home, is just over £10,500. Essentially, the government will make more maintenance loan money available to students from lower household income with a lower household income, and they reduce the loan as household income increases so that students with the highest household income receive the lowest amount of maintenance loan support. So as you can see, it's a sliding scale, but each column, each row will give you an idea of different amounts, down to the minimum amount of maintenance loan. So the maximum threshold for household income is different for each rate, and that is the figure in brackets underneath the title. So for living away, once household income is above £62,377 this year, a student will receive the minimum. Everyone can receive the minimum regardless of how high the income is. So it doesn't matter if your income is 100,000 or 200,000. If it's above that threshold of 62,377, the student can receive the minimum, which is £4,915. So everyone can get the minimum. If the household income is above that, the student will need to be, if household income is below 62,377 and the student feels they might be entitled to a higher maintenance loan, they will need to be means tested. So as you can see, those tapers for the minimum maintenance loan are different. It's higher for students going to London University, so their household income would have to be over 70,000. It's a little lower for living at home, household income above 58,000, and for living away outside London, it's 62,000. So it's a really good idea to estimate how much the student might be entitled to, to the nearest, if you know roughly what your household income is, you'll hopefully be able to look at this table and get a rough estimate of how much the student is likely to receive. And this is really, really important because it is a very large difference, especially if your student is going to be living away from home. The difference between the minimum and the maximum is over £5,500. Now, the government estimate that on average, a student living away from home might need about £10,500. If they are only receiving £5,000, you can see that they are going to need quite a significant amount from elsewhere, from their own savings or support via their family or other sources of income, which we will go on to. So it's really important to have an idea of that when the student starts making decisions about which offers they might accept, what halls of residence they might choose to live in, and how much money they're going to have available to them. So I'm going to briefly talk through some other sources of income for students now. So scholarships, bursaries and grants are key to know about because these are all sources of kind of free money that does not have to be paid back, unlike a loan. Universities are big providers of scholarships, bursaries, and grants themselves. So that's where most of them come from. So it's useful to know about when the young person is researching the universities that they are going to put down on their UCAS form. What scholarships and bursaries does that university offer? And two main ways of doing that are to ask or find out at open days, or to just find it on the university website. So I'd advise Googling the name of the university and putting scholarships and bursaries into the search, and it should take the student directly to the relevant webpage on the university website. Hopefully it shouldn't take them too long, just a few minutes to scan through to see if there is something that that university is offering that they might be eligible for. So often scholarships and bursaries are given for two main reasons. One is to recognise achievement, whether that's academic achievement, so perhaps the student has achieved certain grades whilst they're at college, or it might be achievement in other areas that are non-academic. So it might be sporting achievement. The student doesn't necessarily have to be doing a sport-related course. It might be music or art or some other extracurricular activity. And the other main kind of area is around need. So it's to recognise that some students might require more support or might have more challenges, barriers, or higher needs that might cost them financially when they get to uni. And so it's to help with that, to make sure that those that they're not disadvantaged. So the key thing for scholarships and bursaries and grants is that they don't have to be paid back. They usually help with living costs, but sometimes it might be a tuition fee reduction. And eligibility can vary greatly depending on the university or whoever is providing the scholarship or bursary. So like I say, it might be merit, it could be household income, it could be a whole range of other personal circumstances. It might be linked to the subject that the student is studying. So I would advise checking the each university that the student is applying to or accepting offers from, either asking at the open days or checking out the university's scholarship and bursary web pages. There are also some government grants and scholarships that are available, and I'm going to talk through a couple of kind of major ones. And some companies and charities do also give out scholarships and bursaries. And on my last slide, there is a link to the Scholarship Hub, which is a national database of scholarships if the student wants to do a little bit more research around this area. So for any students who are looking to do courses such as nursing, midwifery, or other allied healthcare professions such as physiotherapy, radiography, paramedic science. The list is a little bit more extensive than that. Unfortunately, it doesn't include medicine or dentistry. But for students who are looking to do something like nursing, midwifery, or one of the other courses I've mentioned, there is something called the NHS Learning Support Fund, where they would be entitled to an extra £5,000 or £6,000 per year. There is some eligibility criteria around this, and just like the student loan, essentially students need to be UK home students, not international students. They also need to be studying their degree at a university in England. But it's useful to know about, and at this stage you just need to kind of know it exists. And again, once the student is kind of accepting offers and starting university, their course should help them apply for it. Another big area is a government grant which comes from Student Finance England. So it's the same place that students receive their student loan from, but this is a grant and does not have to be paid back. It's called Disabled Students Allowance, and it's often shortened to DSA. So this is extra support for students with a disability or a long-term health condition. And also it covers students with learning differences such as dyslexia, or students with an ADHD diagnosis, or autistic students. And this is study support. So it's to help students with the cost of, to help with their studies. It's not medical, won't help with medical costs or non-study support. And it might provide a product or a service that the student might need in order to be able to successfully engage with their studies, and it will pay for that. Again, at this stage, it's just useful to know that it exists. And again, I would advise seek advice from the disability support team at the university your student is likely to go to. This is not means tested, it's based around need rather than household income, and any financial support got through Disabled Students Allowance does not have to be repaid. So once you have an idea of how much maintenance loan the student is likely to get, whether they are likely to receive any scholarships or bursaries, it's useful to then turn your attention towards what are their costs likely to be. And again, this will vary wildly between different universities. So although the tuition fees are likely to be the same or similar at different universities, and all of that is covered by the tuition fee loan anyway, living costs can vary. I'm not going to go through every detail in this slide. I've just kind of got some main areas covered there, but I'll draw your attention to the top row and say if your young person is likely to be living away from home, their most expensive cost, their highest living cost is going to be their accommodation, so their halls fees or their rent. Often bills are included with halls, so their halls fees or halls accommodation costs will usually include bills. But accommodation is the key thing. And as you can see, accommodation costs can vary wildly. Now, these examples are examples from Portsmouth, because obviously I'm aware of how much our halls and how much rent costs for our students in Portsmouth. And you can see that from the lowest to the highest, it can be almost double. So even within a university, there is a huge range in accommodation costs, and kind of choosing what is affordable for your young person can really help their budget. Unfortunately, they're not always allocated their first choice, but at least if they're choosing something that's going to be affordable, that can make a big difference. I'll now look at the bottom row. So Portsmouth is considered a very affordable university, especially considering where we are in the southeast. What you can see there is a student who's attempting to stretch their money across the 40 weeks of our academic year. So they intend to kind of move home in the summer and hopefully be supported by mum, dad or their carer. So they're only looking to stretch their money from September till June. Which is what our accommodation contracts often are. A student living in kind of the cheaper end of the accommodation who's really good at budgeting could easily need £8,500 as a minimum in Portsmouth. And students living in the most expensive accommodation, perhaps with more expensive tastes, could could need more than the £10,000 average that the government estimate. So it's useful to think about that for each university again. When your young person starts to be offered places from their universities and they will develop, ones that they think, well, this is, I think, is my favourite, it's definitely worth looking at the cost of accommodation at those universities and estimating what, if there is a hall that the student thinks they might like to live in, how much does it cost for the year and how does that compare to the maintenance loan they're likely to receive? And if you do that simple part of the budgeting, it will give you an idea of what sort of contribution that the family might need to make in addition to the loan. So how do students manage their living costs? Well, if a student is receiving a lower amount of maintenance loan and they are going to need some extra money, typically, students will use their own savings. Just a reminder about the Child Trust Fund that students born in the UK who are sort of at the age of 17 or 18 will have had from their government, in case you've forgotten about that. And the whole kind of loan system is set up in a way that the government are hoping that students who are going to need some additional money on top of their maintenance loan, that their parents or family are willing and able to help. For students who don't have any savings or access to any support from their parents or family, perhaps their parents or family don't have the spare disposable income available, some students in that position will choose to take a gap year in order to gain employment and save up as much as they can to build up their own savings. Now, there are lots of good reasons why a gap year might be the right choice for individual students, but this is one reason why some students choose to take one. It's also very common now for university students to work at some point during their degree. So more than half of uni students across the country will work at some point, whether that's part-time for a Saturday or evening job across the year. Even if the student wants to focus on their studies during term time, most uni students will have a long summer vacation. If they are able to gain full-time employment during the summer, it offers them an opportunity again to build up their savings for when they return to uni in the autumn. And I've already briefly talked about scholarships, grants and bursaries. I often get asked from parents for ideas if they have to contribute or if they're thinking about contributing. Is there a right or wrong way of doing it? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. But here are some ideas that I'm aware of that different parents will choose to support their young person financially. So some parents, if they have the cash available, will top up to the maximum maintenance loan. So they will give up to the sort of £10,000 bracket, or they'll top up to whatever they can afford. If a young person is likely to be receiving the minimum maintenance loan, some parents might say, okay, we'll pay for your accommodation, you use the maintenance loan for everything else. One that we particularly like in my team is a weekly or monthly allowance. Not only is this often more manageable for parents, but it really helps students with their cash flow. Students receive their maintenance loan in 3 instalments across the year, which means they have to, it's a bigger budgeting challenge than most adults have. Most of us are paid monthly and we only have to stretch our money to last 4 or 5 weeks. But a student has to stretch their loan across 3, 4 or 5 months. So that's quite difficult not to run out too soon. So a small weekly or monthly allowance from parents can be really helpful, and even £20 a week will give the young person an extra £1,000 a year. So and £20 a week, I'm a parent as well, feels more manageable than thinking about thousands. Parents, by picking them up at the end of term or paying their train travel home, not only does that ensure that you see them and make sure they come home, but that is helping your young person out. Lots of parents will be paying for their young person's phone bills, maybe Spotify, Netflix subscriptions and other costs at the moment before they get to uni. So for some parents, that's the bit they can continue helping with. Sometimes parents will make a temporary commitment to their young person. So look, we can support you for 3 or 4 months. You've got to try and find a job by Christmas. Once you've got a part-time job, we'll scale back what we can give you because we can't do it for the whole time that you're at uni. And even letting your young person move home for the holidays is helping them out financially. They may not appreciate it, but that is true. And then finally, how can students hold on to more of their money? So hopefully I've already underlined the importance of choosing the most affordable accommodation and hopefully being allocated that. Because of the rise of the cost of living and the fact that student loan maintenance payments haven't increased with some of the costs, as I said, more students are choosing to live at home and commute to a local university. And for some students, that works really well if there is a local course that they're happy to do. But it's not always the right choice for every student, especially if the course or the university they really want to study at is too far away. All the money saving and independent skills that your young person can be practicing. Cooking food, if they're in self-catered accommodation, is likely to be their second biggest cost after their accommodation. So, the more confident they are with cooking basic cheap meals, the more money it will save them. A student relying on Deliveroo and takeaways will quickly run up a much bigger food budget. Students will all be entitled to one student bank account, and that will often come with an interest-free overdraft, and that can help with cash flow during certain times of the year when perhaps the student is waiting for their maintenance loan payment, but they have a large cost, such as maybe paying a deposit for next year's accommodation. So that can be useful for them when managing those kind of tricky times. And obviously student discounts, always use student discount. I'm going to very briefly talk you through the application process and loan repayments now. I realise we're coming up to time, so I will be very brief. The student finance application is completely separate to UCAS and to the universities. So the students will apply to Student Finance England for their finance because they are currently living in England, even if they're considering going to university in another UK nation like Wales or Scotland. The Student Finance England applications will open in the spring, and there isn't a set kind of opening date. UCAS may contact them, and I'm sure the colleges will let the students know when student finance applications open. They are likely to be open by the Easter holidays, so that's a good admin task to do in the Easter holidays. They will go online, and you can literally Google apply for student finance. They will go online and do their application there. If the student is applying for more than the minimum maintenance loan, they'll be asked to submit their parents' names and email addresses. Parents, you will receive a separate email where you are asked a couple of questions, such as your national insurance number and maybe a couple of questions about your income. And you supply that, and that is how the student is means tested. Now, it can take a couple of months for Student Finance England to assess the application and decide that if the student is eligible for a student loan and how much they're going to pay them. And so the recommended deadline is the end of May. Now, students might still be receiving offers at that point. They may not know which university they're definitely going to. When a student applies in the spring, all they need to do is put their first choice of course and university in. That's not really crucial in terms of getting the loan approved. What is important is by the time the student starts university is that they then have the correct university on their application and course. So a good time to revisit this is after results day, before the start of September, for the student to go back into their online Student Finance England account and just check their application, and they can update their course and university at that point, which means they won't receive a delay in getting their student loan when they arrive at university in the autumn. Okay, now very quickly about student loan repayments. So they are unlike every other loan. Only about half of students are predicted to earn enough during their lifetimes to pay back all of their loans, which means that many students will have some of the debt cancelled. Their repayments will purely depend on their earnings and go up and down with their earnings. The more they earn, the higher their repayments will be. The less they earn, the lower their repayments will be. No one else is responsible, so parents, you cannot be chased for this. It will not stop them getting a mortgage, and it will not affect a student's credit score. So for students going to university nowadays, they don't start to repay their loan until after they've finished university, and then only when they're earning over £25,000 or more. And then what they repay is 9% of everything they earn above 25,000. So that's why it's kind of like an income tax. Students will have 40 years to make those repayments, and if there's any loan or interest outstanding at the end of those 40 years, it is then cancelled. So what it looks like is I've got some gross annual salaries down the left-hand side. So a student earning less than 25,000 doesn't have to make any repayments. Once they're earning over 25, it's 9% of what they earn above 25,000. So for example, a student on a gross annual salary of 26,000 is paying 9% of that 1,000 above 25, which would work out at about £90 a year, or £7.50 a month. So currently you can see the middle column is average take-home pay after tax and national insurance, and a graduate would lose an extra £7.50 a month. The more they earn, the more they pay back each month. But that is the only thing that affects their repayments. If there are changes to interest rates, it doesn't affect these regular repayments. So the only thing is, if a student gets a big bonus one month, they do a lot of overtime, or they get a promotion, they're going to start paying a bit more. If their hours are reduced, or they lose their job, or they start a job that's paid less, their repayments will go down. Interest is added to the student loan, but it's added to kind of the end, to the total. It does not affect their monthly repayments. So it might affect the length of time a student is repaying. But like I say, many students will not repay everything and will have some of this cancelled, including any interest. So my final slide is kind of the useful website slide, which the top left ones are all about student loans. If you want to estimate how much the student might receive for their maintenance loan, it's the student finance calculator. If you want more money about loan repayments, there are links there. There are also links to find out more information about Disabled Students Allowance, the NHS Learning Support Fund, and the Scholarship Hub link is the database of a national database of scholarships that I mentioned, and that might be worth your young person signing up to, putting a little bit of information in, and the Scholarship Hub will email them information about relevant scholarships they might be able to apply for, particularly relevant for things like company scholarships or charity scholarships that are harder to find out about. And then if you want to do any more research, there are kind of all of the websites on the right hand side. I definitely recommend the Money Saving Expert section on students. And then the other things that it's useful for your student to be looking at in terms of finances are the university websites they are looking to apply for, the ones they're putting on their UCAS form, what scholarships and bursaries does each university offer, and what are the accommodation and living costs at that university if they're looking to move there and live away from home. So thanks for listening. If there are any questions, I'm able to wait and answer some now. But if you need to get off, but you do wish to send us an email with a question about student finance, you're welcome to email my team, and the email address is on the last slide there. So there's a question about how much do students get for disabled allowance. They don't get money in their pockets, but the Disabled Students Allowance will pay for the cost of whatever the product or service that can be provided that might help the student with their studies. There is up to a maximum limit of about 25,000 a year, and that might pay for towards the cost of software or towards paying a mentor. But the student, again, doesn't get the money into their account. It will be paid directly to buy that product or service or to pay for that person. And it will involve the disability support team at the university that they are at, kind of helping to manage that. So that's one question I've seen there. There was something about how do they apply for finance if they're applying for both home and away university? So that's another good question. As I said, in the application, they just put their first choice. So if their first choice is an away university, when they're asked about where they'll be living, they'll say away. When it comes to results day, if they're, if once they know for definite where they're going, and results day is crucial to that because that might affect where they choose to go. If the university has changed and they're now going to be living at home, when they go in to update their loan application, not only do they change the name of the university and the course, they change where they're going to be living. If a student decides that they've applied to a local uni, but they actually now want to live away, that again, they can just update that on their loan application over the summer before they get there, or they would just, even if they decide really close, they can let Student Finance England know and they will recalculate the amount that the student will receive. But that's a kind of quick calculation for Student Finance England. So it's still better to apply early and just put something in and then just update the application or contact Student Finance England if where you're going to be living or studying or anything else changes. If you get a new bank account and you want to change your bank account details, all of that can be updated by the student on their online account or by contacting Student Finance England over the phone. Okay.
Claudia, sorry, there's a question about is there funding for armed forces children?
Yeah, that's just the one I was coming to. So in terms of the student loan, there isn't any specific kind of allowances for armed forces children. Some universities might have specific scholarships or bursaries for those for the children of serving personnel or retired personnel. So again, it's worth checking the individual university. And there are some charities that do are kind of connected to the military that might have funding for the children of serving or retired armed services personnel, armed forces. So again, the Scholarship Hub would be a good one to sign up to. So as there's not kind of universal funding, but there might be specific types of funding. For students who join a cadet service as well whilst they're at university, they might be able to get scholarships that way through the army, but that's for students kind of signed up to the military rather than their parents. So there are some scholarships around, but it will depend on the university and the course or the charity that's giving them out. Okay.
I think that may seem to be everything.
Yeah, I did see one there about the difference between the maintenance loan levels between living at home and living away from home. And that is quite an interesting thing. Sometimes parents are surprised that a student living at home can access any maintenance loan. And actually the difference between living at home and living away, the maintenance loans are actually quite close. So the living at home maintenance loan isn't a lot lower than living away. I don't know why the government do it that way, because it does seem to still disadvantage students, because parents are unlikely to charge their own children the same level of rent as a private accommodation will do. So yeah, I don't kind of know why the government calculate the different levels the way they do. But I suppose if the students are living at home, it does allow them to contribute towards household costs using their loan if they are willing, and if they're in agreement with their parents. But yeah, it does seem a bit odd that it's kind of the difference between the living at home rate and the living away rate isn't bigger.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Claudia, and hopefully everyone's got your details. Can I put your email in the chat?
Yes,
your contact
please do.
details in the chat. Can you just read them out again for me?
Yeah, sure. It is studentmoney@port.ac.uk, and I think I'm just sharing it as well now. studentmoney@port.ac.uk.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you everybody for your time. This presentation and slides will be put on the Careers Hub, which can be found on Sparschult's website at the following link. I'll put the link into the chat. Thanks again for attending, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you'd like more information about helping your young person through the UCAS application process.